Part 2 of Black Africa, the Economic and Cultural Basis for a Federated State by Cheikh Anta Diop. Part 2 Compendium of Energy Sources, read by examinfo. Hydraulic energy. World reserves of hydraulic energy are estimated at 50 billion kilowatt hours per year, of which almost 90% are concentrated in undeveloped regions. Europe has only 3%, the United States 4%, and the USSR 3.5%. At the present rate of development, France will have exhausted its hydraulic potential in less than a decade. Harnessing the few remaining waterfalls in France or the U.S. would be prohibitively costly in view of their locations. Black Africa leads all the world in hydraulic energy with its reserves of thousands of billions of kilowatt hours, representing about half the total world resources. The Zaire River, second largest in volume of flow, 30,000 to 60,000 cubic meters per second, by itself holds more than 600 billion kilowatt hours of annual reserves, or two-thirds of the entire production of the world at the present time. The Sanaga and Ogooué, half as much. Engineers have calculated that the Sanaga, Cameroon, having its source at 1,400 meters altitude and a flow 3 times that of the Rhone at the Genesat hydraulic plant, could deliver as much energy as all of the waterways of the French Alps combined. Black Africa, through its hydraulic resources alone, is one of the world leaders in energy. Hydraulic energy is not comparable to uranium ore, which, if need be, can be exported. Up to the present, hydraulic power has had to be used on the spot, and with alternating current can be delivered only over relatively insignificant distances. But Soviet and Swedish technicians have recently accomplished great advances in the long-haul delivery of electric power. When electrical energy is transmitted by alternating current, line reactance, comparable to enormous resistance, accounts for tremendous losses en route, so huge that though the originating voltage may be 400,000 volts, it finally delivers only very slight energy if the distance is of any magnitude. If instead of alternating current we could use direct current, line reactance would disappear. What Soviet and Swedish engineers have done is to maintain alternating current at the source with generators that produce several tens of thousands of volts. Transformers then raise the tension to a threshold of 1,000,000 volts, reversing the current and making it ready for transmission in direct current. John Revor has shown that Sweden is beyond the theoretical stage in this matter. Since February 1954, an underwater cable has been carrying energy from Sweden to the island of Gotland at 200,000 direct current volts, and it could carry as much as 600,000 volts. If 1,000,000 volts were reached at an intensity of 1,000 amperes, each line of this type would transmit 1,000,000 kilowatts, and its full capacity in 1 year would be 9 billion kilowatt hours. Once the problem of moving electrical energy in the form of direct tension has been solved, harnessing the hydroelectric power of the Zaire Basin alone, Inga and Kisangani dams could supply all of the Black Continent with electricity. Solar energy. On an average, the sun daily sends to the earth 10 to the 15th kilowatt hours, 1 quadrillion kilowatt hours. That is to say, a quantity of energy comparable to the sum total of all the energy resources in oil, coal, uranium, and natural gas at present known to exist on our planet. Each square kilometer on which the sun shines each day gets a quantity of energy equivalent to that of an ordinary atomic bomb. However topical atomic energy may be, scientists agree that solar energy is that of the future, since it will exist as long as there is sun. Hydraulic energy, having a comparable permanence, is indirectly dependent on it to the extent that the sun affects our weather. From Archimedes to Felix Trombus, men have tried to tame the sun, and today they are near the point of success. Solar energy can be utilized in a direct form. To do this, one must, as Felix Trombes did at Mont Louis in the Pyrenees, cover a parabolic surface with small rectangular mirrors in adjustable positions. Depending on the surfaces involved, the focus of the great parabolic mirror thus created could reach a temperature as high as 3,000 degrees Celsius, 5,400 degrees Fahrenheit, the heat of the solar atmosphere itself. Felix Trombes has succeeded in using solar forces to melt metallic oxides which heretofore had been completely refractory. A solar oven uses solar heat directly. At Mont Louis, a metric half-ton of iron can be melted in a day. An even more gigantic project was planned in the North Sahara at Kolemshard under the direction of the same scientist. It was to deliver 1,000 kilowatts of power, but was abandoned as a result of the war in Algeria. If instead of trying to achieve a high temperature concentrated at one spot in an oven, the dimension and shape of the mirror were varied to spread the heat over an axis, enough steam could be accumulated to operate a power plant. The heated axis could then be girt by tubing filled with oil, which would be extended into a boiler of water to which it would transmit its calories. This is the Schumann method that was used at Madai, Egypt, in a purely experimental plant, no longer operating. In the most efficient solar connectors, the direction of the mirrors is synchronized to the movement of the sun. Such installations are limited by the enormousness of their size, the state of the sky, and therefore the latitude and the alternation of day and night. Nothing daunted, some scientists hoping for plants that can run without shutting down at night are studying the operation of chlorophyll in greenery to determine how solar energy is stored in leaves. There is a solar plant in operation at Tashkent, USSR, that produces electric power. Solar energy can be utilized in an indirect form by employing solar cells made of semiconductors, silicon, germanium, etc. These techniques have become common and require no further elaboration here. Home electrical energy can now be supplied directly by the sun, and soon solar panels will be mass-produced. Man is no longer slave to oversized machinery. Calculators are common and can slip into a breast pocket, when once they were larger than chests of drawers. Due to the cost of silicon surfaces, solar energy does not appear to be any cheaper than hydroelectric power at present, but it remains a prime future energy source. Present expectations are that future installations will not be on the equator itself because of the permanent cloud cover there, but territories on either side of the tropics might be ideal for solar installations. Sahara, Libya, all of the Sudanese zone as far as Ethiopia, and a large part of the southern African region. Atomic energy. Controlled fission of uranium and thorium is at the basis of atomic energy. A chain reaction is created, giving off enormous heat. 2,000 metric tons of uranium-235 are the energy equivalent of all the world's reserves of petroleum. Current concern with atomic energy makes a discussion of its properties unnecessary here. We can say that it will become part of the industrial equipment of all modern nations within the next 10 years or so. Until 1952, the then Belgian Congo supplied 50% of the world's production of uranium. Today, Africa in all likelihood comes immediately after Canada and the United States with its nearly 5,000 metric tons of uranium metal in marketable concentrations, Zaire and South Africa combined. There is uranium in Ethiopia, Cameroon, Nigeria, the Sahara, Zaire, Ghana, Zambia, Mozambique, Uganda, and the Union of South Africa. where a thorium mine has also been found at the Cape. A good deal of vigilance must be exercised in the exploitation of nuclear energy. The material supplying the energy, uranium and thorium, is not comparable to hydroelectric or solar power, which one would be hard put to carry away in bottles. It is a simple ore, and Africa might easily be stripped of it in record time while it was being stored elsewhere, if the political future were to become uncertain while mechanized mining was allowed without limit. Breeders using high-velocity sodium-cooled neutrons are the reactors of the future for the industrial exploitation of atomic energy. It has been calculated that when present research is perfected, these reactors will produce more fuel, plutonium, than they consume, which seems something of a miracle. It is in this form, and other kindred ones, that Black Africa will have to consider the matter of its industrial nuclear outfitting. Thermonuclear energy. Atomic, or more properly nuclear, energy is a first step in the creation of thermonuclear energy, a mass of uranium disintegrating within a confine containing a certain variety of hydrogen, deuterium or tritium, in a millionth of a second creates heat on the scale of 16 million degrees centigrade or 29 million degrees Fahrenheit, comparable to that inside the hot stars, especially the sun, 26 million degrees centigrade, 36 million degrees Fahrenheit. This little sun with its temperature is indispensable to overcome Colombian resistance, to bring about the fusion of two hydrogen nuclei and produce helium with a slight loss of mass. This lost mass takes the form of radiating calorific energy. In order to evaluate it, one must multiply the mass by the square of the speed of light, that is, 9 times 10 to the 10th power, according to Einstein's formula. The enormous heat of the fusion of hydrogen nuclei due to the reduction of mass adds to the heat of the atomic fission of the uranium, explaining why the H-bomb frees so much more energy than the A-bomb. Unlike atomic energy, thermonuclear energy is not yet available for industrial use. In a reactor, or atomic pile, a chain reaction can be started. It can be intensified, then held to a given temperature as long as desired, and afterwards turned off by pushing in or pulling out the boron or cadmium steel bars that regulate the flow of neutrons. The neutrons, being the bombardment agents that start the chain reaction, the degree of reaction or intensity depends on their flow. As this is written, thermonuclear reactors are still largely the province of theoreticians. The British team, headed by John Cockcroft, which thought it had discovered how to create controlled fusion without the use of an atomic starter, has been proven wrong. The neutrons, the presence of which was supposed to have been the team's proof, turned out to have come from the outside, perhaps from the walls of the casing, or a fission of deuteron nuclei as a result of the weakness of the neutron-proton combination, 2.2 MeV as against 30 MeV for helium as a result of the saturation of nuclear forces. The process used was probably the same found by a young Russian researcher. A reactor is a huge ring, the center axis of which is a column of combustible gas, deuteron, to be fused without coming in contact with the walls. An external coil creates the large magnetic field required to keep the column of gas away from the walls. Indeed, whatever the walls were made of, they would melt at the temperature of 4 to 16 million degrees centigrade, while the column of gas should reach through powerful electrical discharges. This method holds some hope for the control of thermonuclear energy. No one at present is able to put forward a date at which thermonuclear energy will be controlled on an industrial basis. There might be a sudden leap ahead that would allow quick perfecting of a fusion method, but there could just as well be a very long wait for that. The continuing interest shown by industrial powers in the classic source of energy, oil, tells us that we are still far from thermonuclear substitutes which may eventually take the place of all others. Once thermonuclear reaction has become adapted to industry, mankind will without doubt, as the scientists foresee, have an abundant new source of energy. Electrolysis of seawater would become a direct source of indispensable raw material. Heavy hydrogen or deuteron present in seawater to the extent of 0.02%. This tiny percentage is not to be scoffed at, considering the enormous temperature reached by fusion. Production and processing centers would necessarily have to be near the sea in Africa. A territory such as Zaire would be in especially good position. Indeed, in view of what was said above, creation of thermonuclear energy will first require expenditure of an enormous amount of electrical energy for electrolysis. Hydraulically created electricity could prove economical for such an operation. The fact remains that at present we must go by way of atomic energy to get to thermonuclear energy, and until new discoveries have been made, the quantity of hydrogen for fusion will depend on the amount of fissionable material the Earth disgorges. These are the great energy sources within Black Africa, which, in and of themselves, could make this continent one of the most highly industrialized. Although the future of energy research is full of promise, we have listed here only those energy sources that exist in quantity today. This is why we have not discussed either oil or coal. The future place of these two sources in the African economy is undeniable. Pessimism of bygone years has given way to the greatest hopes based on tangible indices. An enlightened policy will consist of encouraging further exploration and development in the double area of coal and oil, in which Black Africa is not now self-sufficient. One must also take note of other complementary energy sources mentioned by some authors, such as Ivan de Jonquet, as due to become important in the future. Wind energy. It has been discovered that, thanks to the trade winds, the entire west coast of Africa could be equipped with huge windmills, as could the Cape region. The Canaries and Kerguelens are already so equipped. It would be wrong to minimize this source of energy, since in Denmark, for instance, wind energy supplies 15% of national requirements. Wind motors or windmills would do wonderfully for initially irrigating the soil and supplying water to cattle in the impoverished semi-arid regions of Senegal, such as the Furlo, Cayour, part of the Baol, and Jambour. Thermal energy of the seas. Carnot's formula can be used to power a plant through the temperature differential at the sea's bottom and its surface. The method employed is that of Georges Claude Bouchereau. It was applied at Abidjan, between the coastal lagoon and a ditch known as a bottomless pit, 500 meters deep. The temperature differential is 22 degrees centigrade, 70 degrees Fahrenheit, enough to make a 7,500 kilowatt powerhouse practicable, according to Du Janché. The Gender region in Senegal is equally well suited to installation of this type of plant. However, one drawback which has been insufficiently anticipated is delaying the work. By creating a vacuum, it is possible to make water within an enclosure boil at 70 degrees Fahrenheit and give off steam that can be directed at turbines to produce electricity. The gases contained in salt water are simultaneously released in the vacuum and create a bubbling that impedes the operation. What is required is advanced degasification of an enormous mass of several tons of water within a closed circuit if boiling in the vacuum at low temperature is to be successfully achieved, giving off homogeneous steam to drive the turbines of the powerhouse. This may be one of the reasons for the Abidjan project having been discontinued. Tidal energy. Making use of the movements of the tides, one can harness an appropriate estuary and create reservoirs, some of which being relatively high up might be filled by siphoning at high tide. The reservoirs thus created would act exactly as do the holding lakes behind dams. At low tide, the water would flow from these reservoirs toward the turbines to keep them working. The drawbacks of tidal energy are twofold. Installation and equipment are so costly as to be affordable only by a great economic power. The sites that prove practical after detailed studies of terrain are rare. The difference between high and low tide has to be very impressive, in the neighborhood of 8 meters, almost 27 feet. In France, the Bay of Mont Saint-Michel and the estuary of the Rance would be suited for such huge enterprises, but actual undertaking of the projects, which would result in economic rebirth for all surrounding areas, is continually postponed because of the enormous cost involved. The French National Electrical Company has calculated that by creating such a powerhouse, it would be able to supply fully half of France's present energy needs, 25 to 30 billion kilowatts per annum. It would be of interest to survey the rise of sea tides in the estuaries of African rivers, especially those of the Senegal River, the effect of which can be felt as far upstream as Podor and the Salom, Gambia, and Casamance rivers. The theory of tidal energy powerhouses is fairly complex. It even includes the Earth's rotation within its margins for error. We will return to this question in discussing the industrialization of Mali, former Senegal-Sudan Federation. Global heat. Carnot's principle can be applied too to the temperature differential between the Earth's surface and a hot subterranean source reached by drilling. This differential could boil water and produce steam under a vacuum at well below 100 degrees centigrade, 212 degrees Fahrenheit. Research and a start toward application have already been carried out in Zaire. Volcanic thermal energy and geothermal energy. This can be employed on the spot by thermal generators that send into pipes buried in lava a great mass of water which, as it evaporates, delivers steam to be directed to operating turbines. The circuit is a closed one, and the recondensed vapor after being used is returned by a pumping system back into the lava. This might be installed at the foot of Mount Cameroon in Kenya. Generally speaking, all of East Africa, Ethiopia, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, and the entire Rift Valley region would be eminently suited for the installation of plants powered by geothermal energy. These are the energy resources of Black Africa. Their utilization by Africans themselves, not to create industries to supplement those of Europe, but to process the raw materials that the continent contains, could turn Black Africa into a paradise on earth.